It's Amethyst Virgo. I'm here on my second channel to do a demonstration on a birth chart for a famous person that we all know. So again, with astrology, I like to use famous examples in order to help us understand astrological placements better, because we all know this person, right? Or we've heard of this person. So when I use famous people, it helps us connect the dots and see that astrology can be quite accurate. Also, this is a birth chart that is verified by astro.com, Astro Databank. That is a good place to go if you're looking for charts that have been verified, right? Because we know for many famous people, some of them we have their birth time, for some of them we do not. And so if we don't have it, we don't know the rising, we don't know the midheaven, etc. So with Michael Jordan, we're going to get started. I'm also going to pull up some transits as well to show you different periods of his life and how astrology helps us see how that all comes together. So the first thing we're going to think through, first thing you know about Michael Jordan is superstar, like, right? Like, people could arguably say one of the best basketball player of all time. Now, again, sports buffs have their opinions, but many people, you could find quite a few people who would still say that, right? And so the first thing you're going to think through is, wait, this is activity, this is action, this is a person who is very, very much, physically talented. So when we think of physicality, the first sign that tends to come to mind is Aries. But when we look here, we're seeing there's no Aries in the chart, right? However, Mars is in Leo, and Leo is a fire sign. So Mars in Leo can represent his desire and need to be better and better, and to just know, authentically shine, but have to work hard for that. And many of you may know the story. I believe, I might have the details a little off. He was cut from like his high school basketball team or something like that. So he did have to work to get to where he was, and then, transition. He played for North Carolina, I believe, in college. However, he also has his moon in Sagittarius. His moon is conjunct his Mars. Okay, so this internal need and drive to, release his enthusiasm, his optimism, into channeling it to something that was going to make him successful is connected. So that's how you can look at astrology. When you see an energy in someone, you're like, wait, this person's really great at this one thing, or this trait stands out. Again, the first thing we think of is, well, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, or Mars is, the ruler of Aries, and we're thinking of action, activity, being bold. But he's not Aries. But we see that his moon is conjunct Mars. So there you get that. Also, those of you who may know, I use a degree system that was created by the late astrologer Nicole Stajonovic, and I've adapted it. I've tweaked it a little bit to the way that I do readings. However, the 13th degree is associated with Aries in his system. So see how his Cancer rising is at an Aries degree. Okay. And so that is how we help connect the dots and how we look at this chart. Not only that, his part of fortune is in Aries as well. Okay. So he does. So this is a great way to start to think of astrology in a more nuanced way. Okay. We don't just want to look at one thing and say, oh, one sign alone, only the sun is related to this. Look at it in a way in which you can connect the dots a little bit better. So we already see there is an Aries, Mars-like energy to this chart, which shows us being bold, being successful in terms of his physical being. However, that Mars and Leo nature is the ability to endure and want to be the best at it. And Michael Jordan didn't do it in a way to be very egotistical. It literally was just like his way of being. Okay. It literally was in his way of, I have to be this. Okay. And when we look at the retrograde of Mars, I think that helps us also understand that there likely were some internal struggles or some external struggles as well, probably more external thinking of Mars, but the moon as well as a factor of his success, of Michael Jordan questioning sometimes some things about his success, which is probably why you also noted that, he retired the first time, and then he went to retired the first time, and then he went to play baseball, right? And then he came back, and I think he played for the Wizards for a little bit, right? And so that Mars in retrograde means there is sometimes like a misapplication, or he feels a misapplication of his actions and what he's doing. Or it could be like people aren't always aware of why Michael Jordan was doing what he was doing, because a retrograde, of course, can be the planet is not forward. Okay. So, and again, a retrograde, I have the full video about that. The biggest thing I also want to share with the Mars being in the second house, it's about the money, right? The fact that he wasn't just, okay, the basketball player, I mean, Air Jordans, right? And his franchise and how that in all of his business ventures. So Mars being the second house can be great in terms of being very successful in terms of your drive to make your own money, but also his Mars being in Leo is about the entertainment field and being good in something that requires popularity, okay? The fact that he has a Cancer rising, I do think makes sense because we're dealing with someone who is quite private about his personal life. He's not a person that was running to the tabloids to talk about his divorce. He's not a person that gives a lot of private information out, right? He is very dedicated to maintaining a certain level of, confidentiality in his life. So you'll notice that a lot about him. And also, we look at where the chart ruler, the moon is. The moon in the sixth house is about his dedication to work, to having a work ethic, to always having something that he is looking forward to. Even now, obviously he's been retired for a while, but he's a type of person that likely needs a level of feeling successful about something. So I bet you he's probably even a retired athlete that still does something competitively. Mars and Leo, especially with him also having his moon conjunct Mars, is like staying active. When you have your moon in the sixth house, it's important to your mood to be active. And moon in Sagittarius becomes more about doing something, to having something to look forward to, something to believe in. He's at the 10th degree, Capricorn degree. He also has Venus in Capricorn. So there is I wouldn't be surprised if he's a retired athlete that golfs or does something that's not competitive, but still competitive enough that he feels like he can obtain something. His North Node is in Cancer, which really helps us understand that his path is about self, but also it's about him dedicating himself to something. What I find interesting here that plays out is the 29th degree, which is associated in the degree system that I use. It's a late Leo degree, which can indicate talent, the 29th degree. So if I have a course where I talk about degrees a little bit more, but the 29 is the brink of that kind of talent being something that can be respected, observed, and acknowledged. And the North Node being the first house about that self identification is about asserting oneself, right? His ability to be a name. But also I think Michael Jordan was able to be a name and stay true to himself. Even with I know that there were other stories. If you look, his first marriage, I think there was some I think I remember reading about there were some affair situations going on there. But for the most part, again, I think a lot of these 90s, 80s, etc. Entertainers and athletes benefited because there was no social media. So unless somebody really ran to a tabloid or a magazine, nobody really knew your business. Whereas now people can go on social media, make a post about you, and everyone's talking about you. Anyway, the fact that he's married twice does not surprise me. His first wife, Juanita, I think he has 3 children with, and his second wife, Yvette, he has, I think, twins. I think he has 2 kids with her. And so I'm not surprised. I mean, look at this. He has his Venus is literally opposing his ascendant. Okay, so it is opposing his ascendant, which can be this this kind of balance act, right? That there can be, he seems kind of like he probably enjoys being the provider in a relationship. Venus Capricorn in 7th house, that doesn't bother him. But also there's a balance between having to play that role, but also trying to give the emotional support that you need to give to someone else. Sun in Aquarius, a Sagittarius moon person is quite open-minded, is quite faith-driven, can be quite, someone who is very worldly, someone who connects to lots of different people beyond their own ethnicity and things like that. But it's not the warmest energy in the world. And remember, having a Cancer rising does not make you a Cancer person. It means you're confronted with those things. It means that The thematically, Michael Jordan was confronted most likely through, the moon being his chart ruler, with emotional attachments to situations that allowed for him to believe in himself. Think about, his brand and Jordan, and like the icon of Jordan jumping on the sneakers, and like how that kind of helps those who bought his sneakers and like think and visualize that they could be like Mike too, right? So it's all thematic in that regard. But what we also can see here that's important is when we look at his where his Venus is in the 7th house, this is a person that's going to probably stay married. Venus in Capricorn, not stay married to the same person, obviously, but Venus in Capricorn is very traditional. And so, it is a sign where it's like this expectation of like having someone in your life. Venus is also in the house that it rules in his chart. So again, I'm not surprised it's not a person that was going to get divorced and stay divorced. Most likely not. Also, with his sun being in Aquarius, when we think of Aquarius, the sun in the 9th house, Jordan, though, is known for being, how do I say this? He's Mercury in Aquarius, so it says Sun in Aquarius. They're very far apart, though, in degrees. Michael talk a lot of junk, right? Like Michael Jordan, in his game, like I keep saying was because I'm talking more about like when he was, in his height of his career. He talked a lot of, he would talk a lot of, smack to players. He's that type of person. Like Mercury in Aquarius kind of doesn't have a filter. Mercury in Aquarius doesn't have a filter. And a lot of the stuff that they say tends to have some logic to it, right? But I think the interesting thing here is how important it is that the Aquarius suns, it's about having something to believe in and to work toward. And, with the sun being in the 9th house, there's always this belief in self. And so what's interesting when the sun is in Aquarius is that it then becomes more about this group dynamic and understanding his place within the group. I think that, and again, this is my astrological interpretation and also loosely knowing some things about his career, Michael Jordan most likely was very aware of his impact on other people. And I think he took that responsibility very seriously, most likely on the court. Like his ability to mold the team, have some sense of responsibility for the team. Like he was aware. He and I also would say Aries on the cusp of his 11th house. Okay, so again, we're looking at his chart. At first glance, we're like, oh, he just has part of fortune in Aries. We dive deeper. We see some Aries degrees, part of fortune. We see Mars is in Leo. He's got some fire energy. And also Aries is on the cusp of the 11th house of groups and associations. And we know the ruler of Mars is in that Leo. So being a leader, right? But being a leader in ways in which he is leading by example, and also the way in which he leads helped him make money because he was able to be seen as a superstar, as someone who was really skilled and really dedicated to his skill. But I think that having even that moon in the Sagittarius in the 6th house gave him that hope, gave him that optimism. He wasn't a kid who got, cut from the team or didn't make the team and said, oh, well, I'm never going to play again. Like that moon in Sagittarius desire to keep going is very helpful for people. Now, the sun in Aquarius, though, you also see that Michael Jordan also doesn't speak out about certain things the way others do. There's sometimes pressure on him from the Black community to speak on Black issues. What you tend to see about Aquarius is two things. Aquarius tends to, how do I say this? Because Aquarius and Sagittarius to some degree, but Aquarius like sees itself as a part of the collective. And Aquarius doesn't have as much of that like concrete group, race driven camaraderie. I'm not saying a person can't have that and be an Aquarius. That's typically not, because Aquarius around, that's not what Aquarius energy is about. Now you could argue and say, well, he's a Cancer rising, and Cancer can be associated with home, with your roots, your origins, people who look like you, people who are from the same country as you, or from the same neighborhood, things like that. But his sun is in the 9th house. So even the fact of him, his current wife is Cuban American, I believe. And so him even marrying outside of his race, I think is a very Aquarian Sag type thing. This kind of openness. Now, again, you could argue like it's more common now for people to marry across races, ethnicities in general. But this is not a surprising thing in this type of chart. Even with Saturn being in Aquarius, even with Mercury being in Aquarius, right? There's this kind of open-minded approach to finding someone who kind of has a shared understanding of certain things about life, things that he requires in terms of having some level of community with someone beyond just having the same skin color or same background and things like that. Jupiter being in Pisces in the 9th house, very beneficial, because this basically is signaling how important it is for him to follow his dreams. And not only follow his dreams, but also do it in a way in which he inspires other people. So Jupiter in Pisces he's not, I think playing with him, of course, I'm sure he pushed his team. He would push people. He wants you to do the best that you can. It's this kind of, well, if I can do it, you can do it. Yeah, I'm Jordan, but you should be able to do this too. Like, that's the energy I get from this. Even with Saturn and Aquarius in 8th house, like, I bet like he was really intense about the way he took his role seriously. Saturn and Aquarius, and also expected other people as well. Like, it's almost like this, I'm so dedicated to this, you should be dedicated too. Now, could there have been conflict with people? Probably. Mars is squaring Saturn. Opposing Saturn. There definitely were some power struggles probably within his life, and also within his experiences, with like even trying to understand how to make things efficient, how to make things profitable. I wouldn't be surprised if he had at least one failed business venture, because that Mars is opposing that Saturn. So even though he's been successful, I wouldn't be surprised if there had been something where he kind of had to, navigate something that really didn't work out the way that he would want it to. Mercury in Aquarius has, again, like I said, has no filter. It is an energy where it says what it needs to say. And it also was a way in which it's like, he's very much, we look at his quotes, it's about doing things in ways that vibe with your belief and the way you think about things. And that is a very Aquarian type thing. But also his moon is sextiling his Mercury. And so those placements, it's not just about the moon and Mercury. Look at the place, look at the sign. Sagittarius and Aquarius, together it's that kind of belief, hope, that drive, that kind of mentality, that kind of openness, that kind of awareness, that kind of, you have to try it, you have to experiment, you have to get this done. Like that, and again, that helps feed into how he thinks. Mercury in 8th house, a little secretive about things. Again, this is not an open book person. Mercury in 8th house, unless he finds that he's comfortable, likely with someone. Saturn being in Aquarius, Saturn being the 8th house could be, there could be, again, there have been issues in some type of serious relationship, probably his first marriage. You also see the fact that he has, with Venus is in Capricorn, but it's also the 13th degree, which can indicate like a fast relationship with his first marriage. I know they were together for a couple years, but it was like a fast type of situation. Also, what's not surprising, I had read in his, what's not surprising in his natal chart is that he had apparently, his mother had wanted him to finish college, but he was drafted by the Bulls. And so he went, to play professional basketball. Well, I'm not surprised. Let's look here at the sun in the Aquarius, right? Aquarius is that rebellious energy. It is an energy that does for itself in order to really experiment and experience. So like, this is not surprising. He was always going to some way make a name for himself, or in some way defy what is expected of him or someone else in his position. So I did think that was interesting that his sun is in the 9th house in Aquarius. And, he didn't fulfill that promise, but I'm pretty sure his family was obviously very proud of him in terms of what he was able to achieve. Why I wanted to talk about the part of fortune. The part of fortune is in Aries. So we always want to look at the part of fortune. Of course, you look at the sign. You also want to know where the ruler, the planetary ruler of that sign is. Of course, it's in Mars. We already talked about the Mars in Leo being in the 2nd house, and how That's great for someone's ability to gain revenue, to be, successful, to be popular in terms of how they invest their money. Mars, to be powerful, to be successful in that regard. It doesn't mean he never had to work hard, but it's like once he gets something started, Michael Jordan was pretty good at that. Even Venus being in Capricorn and how he makes his money, he tends to make probably good business deals and makes decisions that are able to have, some level of longevity to them. What's also interesting about his part of fortune being in Aries is about taking initiative, diving in, doing it, not having a lot of fear. Also, as part of fortune, the 10th house of career, which again, he has a very prominent career. And when he was able to do things independently, like he was able to take a few more risks probably than other people. He has Aquarius on his side, which can be quite logical, can also be quite forward thinking of like, let's revolutionize this, let's do this in a different way. So what, no one else has done it like this. And also having that Sagittarius moon, bringing that level of optimism. I'm going to try this. I'm going to, I'm excited about this. I'm going to let my faith and my beliefs drive me. And also the fact that it's at the 24th degree in the degree system I use. We know that the 24 is associated with Pisces energy, and the 24 can be about that enlightenment. It can be about that ascension, that very, spiritual dynamic. In that regard, it taps into the Piscean energy, even of his Jupiter and Pisces, of belief, of achieving dreams, being able to achieve his dreams, being able to, of course, work hard, but also, there are plenty of people who probably were just as talented, or just didn't make it to the NBA or got hurt early on in their career. And Michael Jordan was able to really, and not just, I think it's maybe, I would say this speaks more to maybe the Mars and Leo popularity, even the Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn in Aquarius is good at being able to lead the group. 15 can be, associated with Gemini energy, which can be about being talked about or being involved in being talked, like this, like there's an energy around him. Like people talk about him, or people talked about him, and people know what he's done, right? There's a respect energy there. But of course, it doesn't come without sacrifice. Saturn in the 8th house can be quite difficult. It can meet a person that has to disconnect from other things emotionally that they need in order to really power through. But I did want to mention that, especially about the part of fortune being in Aries in the 10th house. This is Michael Jordan's transits on the date of his first marriage. So the date of his first marriage, we see that there is, the first thing that stands out to me is, one, we don't see anything in the 7th house, which the 7th house is marriage. However, you do see that he had, this Jupiter was conjuncting his ascendant. Transiting Jupiter was conjuncting his ascendant. We know in astrology, Jupiter, especially with transits, can be really auspicious for marriage. Jupiter can represent children. It can also represent marriage. But in this regard, Jupiter making that conjunct can be very helpful. Also, this could have felt at the time for both of them like a spiritual unit. Like they were coming together to make a better life for each other. I said that because Jupiter is in the 12th house. We know traditionally Jupiter ruled over the 12th house. And so it ruled over the 12th house and the 9th house. And so that can sometimes be a beneficial placement to have Jupiter or see Jupiter in the 12th house. And when we're talking about a relationship, and Jupiter being in Cancer can represent this nurturing aspect, this feeling. Now again, eventually they got divorced, but we're talking about this snapshot of this moment in time. There is also 4th house energy here. This was probably helpful to them to bring their family together. I know they had already had at least one child at this point. And so all this 4th house energy, the moon is conjunct the Mercury, okay? The moon is also conjunct Venus, which we know can represent marriage. It can represent relationship. And so this is showing a good day and a good time that they were in, maybe at that particular point in their lives, okay? When you look here also even at the 6th house represents, there's a lot of retrograde energy, okay? I'm not saying retrograde energy is always bad or it's always something to be concerned about. However, Jupiter is opposing Neptune. It's opposing Saturn. You could argue, like, does this kind of give a hint that this was not a marriage that was going to last forever? You could also argue, well, many marriages don't last forever, right? But there is this kind of like dream versus 6th house of reality. So it could have also meant that there was a compromise they both had to come to in order for this marriage to even come about. Although they did get married and they were together for many, many years, you know, there's is something in astrology sometimes to look at, is how fortunate was this? Like, how long did this last? How long did this really was this really going to, you know, in the long run? Juno is the marriage asteroid. It is conjunct Mercury, and so this is a chart kind of showing someone's commitment, showing that this was a unified, you know, a moment. This was probably a good particular date in order for them to get married. Now, if we look at even his moon is at the 10th degree in Sagittarius, and his moon was at the transiting moon was at the 12th degree in Libra that day. That meant his moon was trining his the transiting moon was trining his not trining, I'm sorry, sextiling his natal moon. So that's also a great mood, a great day in order to facilitate this marriage, even with Venus sextiling the moon. Pretty good, decent energy, you know, for this day. Do we see this date as being a day where someone can hear something emotionally triggering? Look at this. The moon is conjunct Saturn. Saturn's in retrograde. Okay. Moon conjunct Saturn is not necessarily bad, but look at what's going on here. 28th degree, wow. The sun is making a conjunct to Saturn. 28th degree deals with family. 28th degree deals with, usually, again, it could be deal with fulfillment. But so here, it's not fulfillment in a positive way, but it would be fulfillment in the way of getting an answer. There being some level of closure, right? This is the fact that all this energy in the ninth house has to do with bold declarations, truth, right? The moment of truth. So when you look at a chart, you have to take into consideration what's going on in order to really make a concrete decision of what is being, you know, what is being emphasized. Because if we look at it, you know, even when you look here, you were like, okay, the sun is conjunct Mars, the transiting sun is conjunct Mars, in the second house, which can represent something likely that could have been going on that was positive in his life as well in terms of money. But at the same time, he's dealing with this passing over. What's not surprising to me is the fourth house having Mars in it. 25th degree, Mars. 25th degree is an Aries degree. It's one of those, it's more of the spirit of something that was done in a way to achieve some type of ending, something. Usually it's something positive in terms of entrepreneurship, but the 25th degree, if we're talking about, a crime or something like that, it can represent violence, right? This was an attack. His father was attacked. This was something that was, not very well orchestrated, because if you're carjacking someone and they end up deceased or something like that, like, clearly this is taking someone's life over an object, which is a car. But if you look at this, what is the ruler of Virgo? We know is Mercury. Mercury was in the first house. So either way, this chart is helping us understand. Anybody with this chart would be dealing with some kind of emotional news. But the fact that we know what was happening at this particular date, we know what news Michael Jordan received, it helps us understand even more what is really going on in terms of these energies that are working together. And even if you look at the fact that, look at this, Mercury and Pluto are making a trine at the 22nd degree. Okay. Again, furthering this kind of impactful news, something that's very, in this case, unfortunately, was, something very devastating. But this helps us understand a snapshot of what was going on at that time. So for many who may know, whether you were alive at the time or you heard about it, Michael Jordan did play baseball for a little bit. And when he played baseball, I believe it was for the White Sox, he played baseball and he retired from basketball to play professional Major League Baseball. And what's interesting about this time period is, if you look, the sun is in Aquarius, transiting the 8th house, and of course was about to cut into his 9th house. But either way, that's within 9 degrees. That means that the suns are conjunct. So again, Aquarius is the sign of going against the grain, of doing something spontaneous, of doing something in order to figure out a way to, dive deeper into things that you have to explore in order to figure out what they're all about. That is how Aquarius gets its ideas anyway. It's through experimentation. It's through being open to different avenues of thinking. And what's interesting is the 19th degree in the degree system I use is about partnership. It's about making strong alliances. And so the 19th degree was, the sun was the 19th degree that day, which is interesting. Not only that, but clearly the sun was also conjunct Venus. So sun conjunct Venus can be great for signing deals, partnerships, people investing in you. The 8th house can be about investments. It can be about getting money. Mars is also in Aquarius at this time. What's interesting is that Mars is opposing his Leo. He's actually going into some unfamiliar territory. Given that he had played baseball before, he was known as Michael Jordan, the NBA superstar. So the fact that that this date when he signs his contract with the baseball team, it's interesting even that there's opposition between those Mars signs going on. What's also interesting here, if this is something that he always wanted to do, Mercury and Saturn are both in Pisces. We know Pisces is the sign of possibilities, the sign of dreams. And so this idea taken into fruition and really coming, into to reality, Saturn and Pisces is about the reality of things. And so I think people had likely heard that he was going to do this. They weren't quite sure. I think people were likely very skeptical. But then, he signs this deal. What's also very interesting at this time is how the 5th house has Pluto and Jupiter in it. And we know the 5th house is of joy. It is of pleasures. It is the things we like to do. Now, of course, he did not stay playing baseball. Let me see how long he played. I do think, from what I see, baseball was more difficult. It says Cardinals manager Joe Torre on why playing basketball. On why playing baseball will be more difficult than playing basketball was for Jordan. The basket is in the same place all the time. So it is a different sport. Of course, people can be athletic, but there are different rules and different types of skill levels that you need. It sounds like he did pretty well, but like it wasn't amazing. Like, of course, he will always be known for basketball. Okay, but looks like I think he played for like a year. The Major League Baseball strike happened. In March, he returned to basketball. Okay. But again, he had that privilege of doing that. You know what I mean? He's Michael Jordan. So he has the privilege of being able to, hey, I want to play basketball. Now, he did have to go to trainings. He did do all those different things. But that is something just to note about the situation. But what I was bringing up in the 5th house is the fact that the North Node was there. And that's not his natal North Node, but the North Node was there. He also had Pluto there. And what's interesting is that Jupiter, which is the planet of risk-taking, which is the planet that deals with expansion, 14th degree can represent something that is being built up. And so it's actually conjunct his natal Neptune and Scorpio, which really is tapping into the dreams or something he'd always wanted to do. Being able to then, that Jupiter transit helps that actually come alive in terms of the opportunity granting itself for him to be able to play baseball as well. So thought that was interesting. So this is the first time Michael Jordan is filing for divorce. Juanita Jordan is filing for divorce. This is the first time. This is January 4th, 2002. Now let's look. What would we expect to see here? We would expect to see something in any of the water signs. We would maybe expect to see something in the 7th house, the 4th house. We would expect to see some squares or some oppositions. Let's look and see. So this is his chart, okay? So in his chart at the time, what do we notice? What did Jesus see? When they first got married, Jupiter was in Cancer, wasn't it? It was in Cancer in 1989. Now fast forward, okay? In 2002, Jupiter's in Cancer again, but it's in retrograde, conjuncting his ascendant. So that moment years ago where it felt maybe more spiritual, it felt blissful, is now in jeopardy, okay? Now, there's a lot of conversations happening behind the scenes because you can see here that Saturn's in Gemini. Somebody wants to isolate. Maybe he felt, he's isolating himself, then she's picking up on that, whatever the case may be in that. You can probably read up on it, okay? Now, what we also notice here is his natal Venus is conjuncting transiting Venus. Right? They're making that impact with each other. And so it almost could be like somebody felt someone else was not making enough effort in the relationship. Again, it could have been him, like not doing enough. Or her feeling he's not doing enough because she's the one, she cited irreconcilable differences. Also, The moon is in Libra. Now, if you remember, when they got married, the moon was in Libra. The moon was in Libra in his 4th house. So what's interesting is we see that there are 2 really important placements that are still in action, or that have come, like, just by chance, the transit is the same. So it's thematically helping us understand the cycle of their marriage, of the themes of what they were going through. 19, woo. 19 is deliberate partnership. It is about alliances, as I said earlier. So Mars is also making that, transiting Mars is making that conjunct to his natal Jupiter. Usually that's not bad, but we know Mars is now in a sign it's usually not very comfortable in. It's in Pisces. It has to deal with the imagination, has to deal with things that are not seen. So that can be quite difficult. Also, Saturn is conjunct transiting Neptune, bringing forth this kind of like nebula, this uncertainty, this kind of difficulty in terms of their relationship. Mercury even opposing Neptune. Now, if you look at these placements, you do see the opposition. You see Venus is opposing Jupiter. The marriage is in jeopardy. Jupiter, the marriage. Okay. Venus, right? The dream crashing down, 12th degree, Pisces, like this illusion, right? We see there's some Pisces energy here. Neptune, what do we notice? Neptune's at the 7th degree. What is the 7th degree? The degree system that I use. 7th degree is partnership. So you're looking here. The sun in Capricorn, 14th degree. At the time, though, I think Jordan is trying to figure out how to get it together. Like, he is trying to most likely figure out how to make sure this can still be, and maybe even for his business, his brand, it doesn't look good at that moment to be like, okay, yeah, we're going to get divorced. This is not a good time for me. Maybe even trying to make a new business deal. I can't be caught up in a divorce right now. So that sun in 14th degree is trying to work on something. That sun is conjunct his natal Venus. Also, the sun is conjunct transiting Venus. So he, eventually they did figure it out. They were able to come up with some type of living arrangement or some type of agreement. Now let's fast forward to when the real divorce occurred. See the pattern by now in his relationships? I don't know what to tell you, because this is, once again, look at this Venus. This Venus is in Capricorn. Now, here's what I will say about transits. You could look at this for somebody else's chart and say, wait a minute, Venus is in Capricorn, but it was a good thing for this person. Astrology must always take into account the reality of what's happening to apply the meaning to that particular person in that situation. At some point, you might have had someone just like Michael Jordan's chart with Venus in Capricorn who was not getting divorced. So we can't just look at it and say, oh, they're getting divorced. But look at it as like what thematically was happening at the time. The rebelliousness that we can see, 23rd degree, is now something erratic. Doesn't always mean 23 is not always bad, but in this case, we know there's a divorce. So clearly, Venus is not playing a really positive part here, because this is when they finally filed for divorce, and this is when this was the real divorce, okay? As we can see, Neptune is still in Aquarius, just like it was in 2002. However, as you can see, it's inching up. It's inching up, 18th degree analysis. They finally started to think a little bit deeper about something and come to terms with what it really truly means for them, okay? Mercury is conjunct transiting Chiron, which is, again, what did we notice? What did I just say last? The 7th degree comes up again, and this is about the partnership dissolving, the partnership having struggles, the partnership, right? Like Aquarius, it's like, it's too erratic, it's too disjointed for it to really move on, okay? Not only that, Moon is also creating a square to Chiron. What else would we anticipate here? The Moon's probably making some other squares. Let's look and see. The Moon is... it's like, we look at the natal chart, you would say the moon is creating let's see this here. This is square to natal Neptune. The moon being in Taurus is interesting for this, but I think it's also, there's acceptance there of what's about to happen. When the moon is in 11th house, people are starting to rely more on outside sources, on social networks of people in order to, things like that. At that point in time, that's likely what he was doing, just trying to really stabilize himself in one area of his life in order to move forward in another. And so this kind of means that he's likely aware the situation is at the point where there is no more resolving that's likely going to happen. Even with the 6th house here, a lot of work's being done. And I don't think it's work on the relationship. It's almost like decisions are being made, final decisions are being made. If you look at the chart, what else we see? We see that Saturn is also in Leo. Saturn in Leo in retrograde. So Saturn doesn't do too well in Leo because Saturn, rulership is Capricorn and Aquarius. Saturn is most comfortable in those planets. And so when Saturn's in Leo, it can mean like negative shine. There being some level of detaching from something popular, detaching from something. So at the time, there likely was like, some general negative buzz around this, or there being some level of them being being seen in a way that's not always favorable, because right now his natal sun is opposing Saturn. His natal sun is opposing Saturn, which is bringing forth that kind of negative attention. He's used to positive attention. He's used to being private. But at this point now, it's harder to be private because everybody's in your business about this divorce. And what you look at here, in this chart is you start to see how things are coming about and developing in ways to bring him a little more to separate or to transform what he already knew as his family or his marriage, because also Pluto is at the 11th degree in the birth chart. It's directly opposing Uranus in Pisces. So again, when you look at the transits for the beginning of the marriage, you see more of the positive optimism pieces, and as time goes on, especially when we start to look at the divorce filings, you start to see more of the evidence of the relationship unfolding. Okay, so this is when Michael Jordan married his second wife, Yvette Prieto. And if we look here, what do we notice yet again? I noticed Jupiter is still in his 12th house. Not still, it's a different sign. Jupiter's in his 12th house, 16 degrees, a Cancer degree. So this does kind of help us understand the emotional energy here. There's also Neptune at the 4th degree. Neptune is in Pisces at this point in time. And so here you start to see most of the energy in this time that he's married is at the top of the chart, which can mean that there was maybe a lot of more buzz around this marriage, perhaps. At this point, the woman he married was significantly younger, 16 years younger. She also is a model, so there's a lot more, to that. But what stands out to me is Jupiter shows up in Michael Jordan's chart when there's relationship themes. And so I don't know him, right? Some of you listening here probably don't know him either. But I wonder if is, and again, it's not up to us to decide people's fates, their soulmates, or anything like that, that if, he was meant to have these two marriages. Like, despite him and Juanita not making, forever, they still had a long marriage. Jupiter was in Cancer in the 12th house when he married her. Jupiter is now in Gemini in his chart when he marries his second wife, Yvette. And then also here, though Venus, there's nothing in the 7th house, Venus is trining Venus in the 11th house. So I don't want to make assumptions of why anyone marries anyone, because again, two people are two people. There are things we will never know. We can only go by what we see here, right? But I think it's interesting because it's like there's a lot of 11th house energy that's to do with society, that has to do with, trying to fit into a certain aesthetic, fit in with a certain group of people. I don't know if this heightened her lifestyle. I'm not judging her at all. She could be a very lovely woman, but the 11th house means something. Like, he has 11th house energy when he's getting married. So I'm wondering what the social implications of this marriage were. What this is creating, because the 11th house brings forth, there's new alliances, there's new associations, there are new ways in which people are becoming a part of a community or part of something. So I do think that's interesting that he has 11th house stellium when he's married, because 11th house typically has nothing to do with that energy. But he does have Sun conjunct Mars, which can represent a decision to have this marriage in a way. Maybe it was like, I wonder if their marriage, their wedding was really big. Let me look this up. Or if they have a business together. Do they have a business together? That would be interesting. They've been married. Yeah, they had 500 guests. Let's see. Interesting is When Michael Jordan got married both times, his moon either had a conjunct or it had a sextile. Okay, so thinking about marriage, dates, and how moons sometimes can have an indication there. The moon is in Sagittarius, conjunct, right, the sixth house, and so it might even felt like, you know, something he was looking forward to, something that he felt was really, you know, going to. I feel like whatever assumptions we have about the marriage or the age difference or anything like that, I think the moon being the sixth house is really indicative of like there is some level of like this fits my life. This marriage is going to fit well. Like regardless of what we think, that's what the chart is indicating here. Saturn being in the eighth, Saturn being in the fifth house, the eighth degree. Saturn retrograde in the fifth house can represent this kind of difficulty in terms of like there being you know, there's some type of difficulty in terms of getting things together. All right, so once again, Michael Jordan has a very interesting relationship with Jupiter in Cancer, okay? Like literally, a lot of important moments in his life have Jupiter in Cancer in them. We know Jupiter in Cancer can be dealing with, you know, enthusiasm, optimism around nurturing, around support. And at this point, you know, his twins were born on this date. Jupiter is in retrograde. However, we also see that Jupiter is conjunct the ascendant, and the moon is in Cancer in the first house. You know, being very proud parent, being a very happy parent. You know, even Venus, Capricorn. Like this man's transits are very interesting when it comes to these relationships and his marriages, his divorces, and his children. I did not go over all his children's births, but Venus is in Capricorn. Venus is in Capricorn, conjuncting his natal Venus. Venus is also conjunct Pluto, which can be beneficial in terms of something being, you know, transformed, changed. You know, there's a big age gap between his oldest children and his youngest children, and so this was something that was like life changing. Pluto being the sixth house, dealing with themes that are very having to change, you know, revamp, revitalize, do something that has to do with your life. In terms of your daily life. Saturn is now no longer in retrograde, so I don't know if there's a delay with having kids with this partnership or there was a reason why, but Saturn is now no longer in retrograde. It's at the 23rd degree. Children are born. They're also Aquarius is like him. The sun, this transiting sun this transiting sun is meeting up with his natal sun. So this is just similar when he went to start baseball. Like when new beginnings happen for Michael Jordan, it seems that his sun is making that conjunct to that natal, that transiting sun. Of course, we also see that there's Neptune conjunct Mercury, Mercury conjunct Neptune, which can represent good news, miracle, things like that in terms of the birth, in terms of the children being born.